Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Smith, the Curriculum Coordinator for the BioNetwork Bioprocessing Center, and welcome to today's BioForum webinar entitled Opportunities for North Carolina Farmers and Growers to Produce Higher Value Crops, Part 2. Our BioForum is scheduled to run from 10 a.m. until approximately 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our panelists today are Paul Ulanch, the Development Director for Biotechnology Crops for the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, Dirk Benson from Syngenta here in North Carolina, and Vande Berg with Bayer CropScience, also here in North Carolina. In just a moment, I'll turn it over to them and we'll begin today's BioForum. We'd like you to feel free to ask questions by typing them in the chat box located on the right side of the screen. I'll be keeping a record of each question that is submitted, and we'll have a time at the end of the presentation to address all of your questions. Please mark your calendar for our next BioForum event entitled Window on the Workplace 2012, which will be presented on November 8, 2012 at 10 a.m. Registration for this event is free and will be available within the next few days online at ncbionetwork.org. We would like to remind our audience that if you log on to ncbionetwork.org/IET, you can take advantage of our free interactive e-learning tools that we have created in the BioNetwork. These cover a wide variety of topics, and we are certain that you will find some of these that you can use. Thank you. We're excited to have each of you with us, meeting with us today. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Ulanch to introduce our other panelists.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I'd really like to thank Greg and his team at the BioNetwork for allowing us to convene this educational session. Today we've got Drs. Kurt Benson from Syngenta Biotechnology and Vande Berg from Bayer CropScience. Each of these scientists lead their respective teams on trait development efforts, and primarily in corn. Many of the traits that have been commercialized thus far, primarily in corn and some other crops, include things such as herbicide tolerance and insect resistance. And up-and-coming traits could include drought tolerance, growth optimization, or perhaps nutritional improvement. So we're going to learn about what these two companies today are kind of doing in those fields. In this session, we'll learn hopefully how these two companies are improving agriculture now for North Carolina, as well as what developments are going to happen in the future. This is actually part 2 of a series that, for those who may have missed our June 7th webinar, you can actually find this previous webinar at the BioNetwork site under BioForum on Demand. Pardon for my lack of creativity in coming up with a title. However, my intent today was that there actually are some commonalities between these two webinars. In the previous one, you'll notice we had Dr. Kirk Francis from BASF Plant Science. A lot of his presentation was perhaps similar in some respects to what we're going to hear today. And in addition, we had an interesting presentation from Jeff Riddle at Technology Crops International. That's a company that actually offers a contract opportunity to grow oilseed crops in North Carolina that primarily includes high uricic acid rapeseed as well as sunflower. And I should say, actually, before I click ahead, there's really no reason to have listened to the first version or part 1 of the webinar series. They're not really necessarily joined together, but they are somehow related. So here's our objective of why is the North Carolina Biotechnology Center participating in this. It's threefold, in a matter of fact. Most importantly, our aim is to offer information to educate North Carolina's farmers and growers to plant higher value crops or perhaps increase their overall profits from the use of biotechnology. We also hope that educators of farmers, such as folks from Cooperative Extension, Department of Agriculture agronomists, Farm Bureau specialists, crop consultants, can hopefully learn more about what these two companies are offering and further relay this information to additional farmers so that a broader swath of our agricultural experts across the state are more informed about valuable opportunities. And then lastly, we hope broadly that this group and others, that we can illustrate that biotechnology is very broad, and there are numerous ways in which crops can be improved to feed, fuel, and heal the world. In addition, our aim at the Biotechnology Center is really to kind of highlight some of the agricultural industry assets that we have across the state. These are both public and private, from the university sector all the way through some of the corporations that you're going to be hearing from today. We just want to make sure that people are aware of these unique assets that we have in the strength. I would like to highlight that North Carolina, we could actually call, is a hotbed of agricultural biotechnology. Both Syngenta and Bayer CropScience have their North American headquarters in North Carolina, each of them with multiple operating R&D centers throughout the state. And before I begin with Dirk, I just want to make sure that my contact information was available in case anybody has any further questions or wants to know how to get in touch with us to find out more about what our unit is up to at the Biotechnology Center. And I also wanted to reiterate what Greg had just mentioned previously. He will provide a survey at the following of the webinar today. Please complete this, and I compel you also to make note of any further content that you would find valuable that we can hopefully help put together for future webinar series such as this. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our first presenter, Dirk from Syngenta.
Okay. Can everyone see my presentation? So I would like to thank everyone for inviting Syngenta to give a presentation about what we do here in North Carolina and a little bit more about who Syngenta is. So in Syngenta, our purpose is to bring plant potential to life. We are one of the world's leading companies in agriculture with more than 26,000 employees in over 90 countries around the world. Our main businesses are crop protection chemistry and seeds products to help growers increase their crop yields and productivity. We want to contribute to meeting the global food demand in feed and fuel by not only protecting our environment, promoting health, and improving our quality of life. A little bit about Syngenta. We have a unique and broad portfolio. We are a leader in the crop protection area, and we are the third in the world in high-value commercial seeds. We certainly have world-class science. We invested over $1.2 billion in research and development in 2011, and we have over 5,000 employees in research and development around the world. We have a commitment to working with our customers, and we pride ourselves in being able to tailor solutions to the individual needs of a grower. We develop fully integrated offers on a global crop basis, and our primary delivery into the marketplace is with corn, soybeans, cereal crops, rice, sugarcane, diverse field crops, vegetables, specialty crops, and lawn and garden. And some of those are very relevant to North Carolina, and others are probably more relevant to other parts of the world. Our strategy is to integrate our products to bring better solutions to our customers. So this is really around bringing increased value through combining our crop protection and our seed technologies in novel ways. Our R&D efforts are aimed at providing a total crop solution to help produce more from less resources. The choices on the farm are to ensure that farms can meet their productivity potential. We want to accelerate and share our new innovations, and we want to share our knowledge in exploring new partnerships to raise the agronomy skills and expertise. So a little bit about Syngenta here in North Carolina from the research and development side. I'm located in our RTP facilities. We have proven delivery of biotech through the operations we have here in North Carolina. The organization, Syngenta Biotechnology, was formed in 1984, and it's here in Research Triangle Park. We have strong ties with the local community and academic institutions. We have state-of-the-art facilities, over 120,000 square feet of lab space, 50,000 square feet of greenhouse space, plenty of office space, and we have a little over 400 employees, and we are currently expanding. As far as an employer is concerned, we in 2011 were ranked number 8 out of 575 companies by Science Magazine as a top employer. We, in the Scientist magazine, are listed among the top 40 companies for the annual honor of best places to work in the industry. And we said we are growing here in North Carolina. Expansion is underway. At the RTP location, we are expanding our greenhouse capacity by more than double. We have already invested or are planning to invest by the end of this year $71 million in this facility. It's almost 150,000 square feet in footprint, and we intend on being complete before the end of the year. In this environment, greenhouse environments, we are able to create environments that allow us to look at a number of different crop environments to do our research and our testing in. Now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the products we've developed, not only with work that's been done here at our RTP facilities, but looking at our global R&D footprint. The first one I want to talk about is Agrisure Artesian. This is the world's first water-optimized technology for corn hybrids. It delivers improved yields in dry land and in limited irrigation acres, areas where there's low rainfall environments, as well as acres in higher rainfall environments which are prone to moisture stress. The concept demonstrates that we have up to 15% yield preservation under moderate to severe moisture stress. This next slide graphically represents what we mean by 15% yield recovery. You can see on the left, in well-watered conditions, the standard hybrid in orange and the water-optimized hybrid in green have comparable yield. In a moisture stress situation, where the standard hybrid loses a significant portion of its yield, the water-optimized hybrid, the yield preservation that's demonstrated here is a 15% yield recovery. So why is this unique to corn and agriculture in comparison to what we've done in the past? If you look at this graph, the red line is the trial average, so the average of the elite checks in these trials. And on the left side of the graph, you will see low yielding environments due to drought conditions, 100 bushels or less. If you look at the right side of the graph, these are high yielding conditions, 240, 250 bushel yields. If you're a farmer that has a high yielding environment, you want to plant what we call the racehorse type hybrids. These hybrids are able to exploit the high yield conditions, the high productivity environments. And you can see relative to the elite checks in the trial, in these high yielding conditions, these hybrids outperform. If you're a farmer who's got land that is in under stress and drought conditions, you most likely want to plant what we call a workhorse hybrid. These hybrids perform well in these stress environments, and if you look around the 100, 120 bushel yields, this hybrid out-yields the checks and certainly out-yields the racehorse hybrid. The dilemma happens when either in your high yield conditions you suffer drought and that racehorse hybrid is not able to keep pace because the yield potential has gone from 240 bushels to somewhere around 140 bushels, which is typical of large portions of the Midwest this year. Or if you are planting in a stress environment and you get plenty of moisture and the trial mean goes from 120 to something like 200. In both of those situations, you have the wrong hybrid for the environment that it was planted in. So what does Agrisure Artesian do to help this condition? So what we've been able to do with Agrisure Artesian products is relative to the trial average, we've been able to exploit the environment either in the drought conditions or in the high yield conditions with the same hybrid. So across the environmental yield ranges, these hybrids outperform the other hybrids in the marketplace. And how did we go about understanding how to do this and how to create this? So we have a number of what we call managed drought stress locations. And these are locations where in a normal cropping year it does not rain or rains very, very little. And in the bottom right you can see a picture of our site in Gilroy, California. This in the summer months does not get rain. We have irrigation here, it's above ground, but we have since buried that irrigation underground. Each one of those rows is irrigated by a single piece of drip tape. And in that field, in each one of the trials we run in those fields, we put in soil moisture probes. And the picture at the top right, the small one on the left, the white tubes are the moisture probes. We put them 1 meter down, about a half a meter down, about 20 centimeters down. So we can monitor the water content of the soil. The blue data logger on the top is such that you can download the information wirelessly. And what we're able to do in these environments is pictured over on the large picture on the left side, where full irrigation, the corn looks normal, healthy, robust, green. And on the left 2 rows, that is a season-long stress that we've imposed. And we were able to not only impose these stresses, but to get repeatable data out of these sites. And when you deal with drought, one of the things that is most difficult from an experimental perspective is to get reliable data back. So these sites allow us to not only manage the water very well, but get data from a number of different parameters that are plant responses to drought and show across the specific genetic entity that those data or that data that you collect is repeatable over time. So when you look at then what you can do with these environments and you look at the technology that's available to companies involved in genetics, where we can identify either through marker chip technology or through sequencing the sequence of the DNA or the genetic markers, we can identify through or with unique genetic entities in these managed stress environments the genes and the chromosomal locations of those genes that give a favorable response to that plant when faced with drought. So these marker trait associations that we're able to determine by taking our phenotypic data from the field and analyzing it relative to the genotypic data of the entities that were planted in that field allow us to identify the chromosomal locations that you want to have in your products so that they're able to perform better than the environmental mean. So this has allowed us to create unique and novel gene combinations in corn that give us the performance we see in Agrisure Artesian. We were the first in the market with that, and we are, this last year was our 2nd year in the marketplace with those types of products. The next area I want to focus on is the product we call Agrisure Viptera, and this is an insect control product. So this product is designed to deal with what we call the Multi-Pest Complex. And this complex of insects is a collection of lepidopteran corn pests. The lepidopterans are the moths and the butterflies that can do significant economic damage due to the fact that they're unpredictable. The various species are present throughout the growing season. Scouting is difficult, and it's challenging to treat these effectively with foliar insecticides. The data here around the number of bushels and the dollar value of that was calculated in 2007. It was about 240 million bushels are damaged or lost each year at a cost of about $1.1 billion. Two things I want you to remember about that. One is in 2007, the corn crop was in the low 80 million acres. This year we're around 95 million acres. And the grain price of corn was about $5 a bushel, and current price of corn is about $8 a bushel. So those two factors would lead you to a calculation that the multi-pest complex costs American farmers in today's world somewhere around $2 billion. So if you look at these insects in particular, we'll start over on the left side with early vegetative growth in the corn plant, and on the right side we go to full maturity. The black cutworm is present here in North Carolina, and it is an insect that is laid, where the eggs are laid, is the seedlings are coming out of the ground, and the nature of the damage is that the pest literally chews off the corn plant, and in a sense you've lost that plant for the season. The next one is a cornstalk borer, which is also here in North Carolina, and it is an insect that bores into the stalks of these young plants and causes significant disruption of the vascular tissue and introduces disease. The fall armyworm is a pest that feeds on the leaf tissue of the plant and can literally decimate the crop from foliar damage and has significant impacts on yield. The sugarcane borer is actually not present here in North Carolina, but it's present in other parts of the southeastern U.S. And again, it's an insect that feeds on the leaf tissue of the plant and then bores into the stalk. Western bean cutworm is an insect that is moving east. It originally was confined to the dry bean growing area of western Nebraska and is now found as far east as Indiana and Ohio, and is moving south and east. And I don't know that it will be here in North Carolina anytime soon, but in the last couple of years, its march across the Midwest has been eye-opening. And the last one is certainly a pest in North Carolina, which is the corn earworm. And this pest is also a pest in cotton and tomatoes, but the adult female lays eggs on the corn silk, and the young larvae eats the corn silk and then starts chewing on the kernels of the ear. So we created a product using what we call VIP proteins. And VIP proteins, if you look at the graph on the left, are expressed in the exponential growth phase of the bacteria. And the cry proteins, which are the other proteins that are used for insect control, are actually expressed when the bacteria sporulates. And the cry proteins, you can see the crystal picture on the right. So they both have a similar way in which they bind to the insect gut. And at the binding site, then there's a pore that is formed, and these pores result in insect death. So they literally lyse the gut membrane of the insect. The VIP3A protein binds at a very different site than the cry proteins do in the midgut of the insect. And these different binding sites are considered different modes of action. So you have multiple modes of action in these products we're going to talk about for a number of the insect species that we can control. So a little bit about the type of control that we get. This is a slide of the EPA method 4. It's a dose study around corn earworm, Helicoverpa zea. And with the box diagram at the top, the conventional hybrid, without the trait, we had about a little less than 800 plants. We infested them with about 15,000 larvae. And at the bottom of the box, the Agrisure corn borer plus Viptera, almost 2,800 plants, and infested with about 50,000 larvae. If you look at the graph at the bottom, you can see that the conventional hybrid, on average, had about 1 larvae surviving. And if you look all the way over on the right, the Agrisure Viptera product had none. There's not another competitive trait in the marketplace that can do this. If you look at the same method high dose confirmation EPA method number 4 for fall armyworm damage. The negative check at the bottom, we evaluated about a little less than 300 plants. We put on 20,000 larvae, and about 550 survived, almost 2 larvae per plant. If you look at the top line, 1,800 plants were evaluated with over 130,000 larvae and not a single survivor. Again, there isn't another trait out here that can do that. And I will conclude my talk with one last slide on black cutworm damage. So this is in a farmer's field in Illinois. And on the left, you can see the rows of seedling corn that are undamaged. This is Agrisure Viptera and a competitor product without Agrisure Viptera in it. You can see the decimation of that field by the black cutworm, where the plants have literally been chewed off and in a sense are disappeared. The yield potential of that field has been severely impacted by the by the black cutworm. And with that, I'd like to thank you all and have each one of you remember that Syngenta is one of the leading agribusinesses, and our goal is to bring plant potential to life. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks a lot, Dirk. I want to remind everybody to start brainstorming some questions and make sure you can type them in the chat box. Greg will accumulate them throughout the presentations, and I'll moderate those at the very end. I've come up with a handful myself. But before we move on to questions, let's transition this over now to Brian Vande from Bayer CropScience. I know they've got some similar yet unique technologies they're also working on, and we'll see how these are counter to what Syngenta is developing. I think we're going to find a lot of value here for the state of North Carolina. So with Brian, you want to cue your presentation up?
Okay, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Brian Vande. I work with Bayer CropScience here in Research Triangle Park. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I came into this area back in 1990 to go to school. I went to North Carolina, and I ended up staying around. You know, there's just a lot of great science, a lot of great opportunities here in North Carolina, and so I've certainly done, been able to find a lot of opportunities and followed my passion here in North Carolina, so it's been a great ride for us. So the way I've got my talk structured is maybe a little bit similar to how Dirk structured his. I'm going to start off talking a bit about our company and how we're organized. Then I'll tell you a little bit about the crops that we work in here at Bayer CropScience, and I'm going to dive in a little bit more into the research. The site that I work at here in Research Triangle Park is primarily a research and development site, so I'll be telling you a little bit about how we approach our research problems and sort of the focus we put in on them, and then I'll kind of do like Dirk did. I'll show you some pictures that I think will give you a pretty good idea of what we're working on and some of the successes that we're having. Okay, so to tell you a bit about the company. So Bayer CropScience is a large business, and we're split into 3 main business units. Our healthcare is actually our largest division. It's based primarily in Europe, but we also have large research facilities here in the United States. Material science is the area where we develop sort of like high-value materials, for example, paints and alloys and that kind of a thing that are used as sort of building block materials around the world. But then the area that I focus in on is in our crop science business. A crop science business, as I'll show you in a little while, is also based around the world. We have large facilities both in Europe and in Asia, as well as here now in North America. All told, Bayer employs about 120,000 people around the globe, and in the crop science division where I work, there are about 20,000 employees. Okay, so to tell you a little bit more about crop science, it's also divided into 3 different areas. The area in which we've had the most experience over many, many years is our crop protection business. Like Syngenta, we're one of the leaders in insecticides and fungicides and herbicides, so the chemistries that a farmer will apply on top of his field. Where Bayer CropScience has been investing a lot of effort and money over the past 5 years in particular is in our bioscience business. So bioscience is basically seeds and traits. In the seeds area, we've been in vegetable seeds for some time, but what has become a much larger business for us now is our seed business for agricultural crops, and some of our key crops are listed below here. Finally, the last business to tell you about is our environmental science business. This is what we refer to as our professional and consumer products. So if you go down to Lowe's or Home Depot and you buy a Bayer advanced product that's put together by our environmental science business. Okay then. Thinking about bioscience and how we start approaching the problems, you can describe our attack in sort of a three-pronged approach. First thing we do is we have to go after what we consider to be the stress targets of farmers. What are the things that can affect the harvest year in, year out and prevent a farmer from really getting to the yield he needs to get? And so we think primarily about weed pressure, insects, diseases, and some of the environmental stresses like drought and heat. Okay. So that's sort of objective number one. You just don't want a catastrophic event to occur in your field. Secondarily, you want to try and enhance your yields to the best you can. If you can squeeze an extra 10 or 20 bushels out of your field per acre, multiplied over the size of farms that are prevalent in the U.S. today, that translates into a really, really big, food advantage as well as a really big yield profit for the grower. And so we also spend a lot of our research effort towards, enhancing the yields of key agricultural crops. And then finally, we've also been devoting more of our effort in recent years into the so-called quality traits, where quality is just simply enhancing the quality of what the farmer is harvesting. So in the case of a cotton crop, you might want to have a better quality of fiber in the cotton. Or in the case of an oil crop like say soybean, you might want to have a better quality of oil content or a more nutritive oil quality. And so we have research programs that are geared towards all three of these areas in our pipelines. Okay, so to tell you a little bit about the crops that Bayer CropScience has been focusing on. So the four that I'm showing you on this slide are sort of our more stable product lines, meaning that we've been going after these areas for several years now, and we've become pretty established in each of these businesses. Oilseeds, also known as canola, we've been very strong in for quite some time. This business is primarily focused in the northern parts of North America, so up near the U.S.-Canada border, as well as in Europe. And so at this point, Bayer CropScience is #1 worldwide in canola. Our cotton business has seen a lot of growth in recent years. Much of our cotton business is focused on the U.S. as well as parts of Far East Asia. Some of the brands that we market our cotton under are shown here. The FiberMax and Stoneville brands in particular are well known in the industry. And at this point, we've now reached #1 worldwide in cotton. Our rice business is a little bit unconventional from the standpoint that we focus on what's referred to as hybrid rice. Non-hybrid rice is the predominant form that's grown on the planet. We've chosen to put our investment behind hybrid rice because it gives a little bit higher yield to the farmer. So we're hoping we can grow this business and demonstrate the advantages of hybrid rice on a bigger scale, which will allow us to sell even more rice and allow farmers to be even more successful in terms of the amount of rice that they can harvest on their field each year. And finally, vegetables, I mentioned earlier. Our vegetables business is based primarily in Europe, although we're making some nice inroads into the U.S. market as well. At this point, we're #4 worldwide in vegetables. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is kind of jump away from the sort of the big picture and focus down now on the research that we're carrying out within Bayer CropScience, and I'll sort of slant this also to give you more emphasis on the research that we're doing at our site here in RTP. I should mention that most of all of the people that we show in our pictures are true Bayer employees. The person here she actually works at our site. Her name is Jamie. She's playing with some soybean plants, and she's sort of a local talent. She grew up in the Triangle, and she went to school at UNC Greensboro. Okay, so to tell you a bit about our research effort, I mentioned earlier that it's focused globally at this point. I can tell you early on, most of our research effort was focused in Europe, being that Bayer is a German-based company. Our largest research site at this point is still in Ghent, Belgium, where we have a dedicated team of about 300 scientists. Since the time, though, we've really started to expand out. We've put together more of a footprint in the Far East, where we've opened up research centers in Singapore and also in India, in Bangalore. And then even more recently, we've really started to expand our footprint in North America. I mentioned earlier that we have a well-established canola business. A lot of the research there takes place up in Canada, in Saskatoon. We have a nice vegetables research site out in Davis, California. We do a lot of cotton research at our facility down in Lubbock, Texas. And most recently, just in the last 3 years, we've now opened up a large research facility in Morrisville, which is right by the airport here in RTP. This decision to open a site in Morrisville is key in that it signifies that Bayer is sort of moving away from some of the, or not moving away from, but we're moving beyond the crops which had previously been our sort of strong business areas. We're really strong in canola, and we're strong in cotton, and we're strong in hybrid rice. What Bayer decided to do was to really go after the large acre crops. So in North America, if you're going after large acreages, you really have to be looking at corn, and you have to be looking at soybeans. So the research at our site here in Morrisville and RTP is really focused on corn and soybeans. In terms of growth and in terms of the size of our site, we're now the second largest research site worldwide, second only to our Ghent, Belgium site. So worldwide, if you're talking about our effort in research, we now have about 80 different breeding and field stations around the globe, and we have a team of about 1,000 scientists working just in research for our bioscience business. Okay. To give you some insights as to how we approach research, going back historically, a lot of your ability to be successful in agriculture related to your ability to breed successfully. By breeding, I'm meaning, starting with conventional breeding, where you're just taking naturally occurring variants of the same crop, breeding them together, and just trying to identify improvements by, taking, line A versus line B and making a cross out of it. We continue to do this in a very large scale. There's still a lot of benefits to doing conventional breeding. And in fact, some of our products that are sold around the world are entirely conventional, meaning there's no GM technology involved. It's just conventional breeding that allowed us to reach our performance targets. Over time, though, we started to infuse more and more technology into our breeding to allow us to be more accurate and be more successful, if you will, in terms of our ability to generate a predicted outcome. Some of the technologies that we do more routinely now, we do a lot of hybridization work. For example, in canola, that's been key to success in that business. We work a lot with different farming practices that allow us and allow the growers to improve the quality of the crop and improve yields each year. When you think about breeding, you're essentially moving genes around and allowing different genes to come together in desirable combinations. And so ourselves and others in the industry have really embraced the practice of marker-assisted breeding, where you can more precisely track the exact genes that are moving between different crosses and pull out those crosses that are most desirable to the quality of the plant. Okay. Ultimately, through these breeding practices, you can often achieve very substantial gains in the performance of a given crop, and we continue to do so. In many cases, however, it's simply the case that conventional breeding will not allow you to reach the true target. And so it's often the case that it's desirable to turn to genetic engineering to finally give you the true performance that you need. And by genetic engineering or GM modification, we're simply describing the practice of taking a gene from one organism and moving it into a different organism. If you look at many of the products that are on the market today in agriculture, in many cases the gene has come from a bacterial species and has been moved into a plant species to confer a specific desirable trait into the plant. And so, speaking to our efforts within Bayer CropScience, we have vast efforts in non-GM or in sort of conventional breeding, as well as large efforts in our genetic engineering approaches. If you think about the work that we're carrying out here in Morrisville in RTP, it's primarily in the area of genetically modified crops, and again, primarily geared towards corn and towards soy. Okay, so to sort of in a single slide here tell you what we've got and what we're working towards. We've focused a lot of our effort on insect control genes over the past several years. We just feel that insect control is going to be key to growing both corn and eventually soybean well in North America as well as around the world. And so we just feel that we need to be very strong there and have just really bulletproof traits to bring into the marketplace. Beyond needing insect control, farmers always need herbicide control as well. You know, weeds are an inevitable consequence of trying to grow a crop on fertile soil. And so ultimately you need to have a cadre of herbicides that you can apply onto your crop to wipe out the weeds, but then also you need to have the genes in those crops to prevent the herbicide from destroying the crop itself. And so we've developed a nice portfolio of herbicide tolerance traits during the past several years. And again, bringing this all together, we couldn't ignore our scientists as being one of our key assets, as well as the breeders that support the work in the lab. And then finally, the teams that are responsible for bringing the science into the marketplace. The R&D effort is very early on in the process. From the time you first identify a trait to the time you can actually sell it to a farmer is several years. And that's where you need to build an experienced team that can help bring these things into the market. And we've done just that. Okay. Okay, so to tell you a bit about what's going on in the labs and what we found to sort of support our research programs. The diagram that you're looking at here, it's a little bit unusual. This is actually a dendrogram, and what a dendrogram is it's just it's a graph that shows the relatedness between things. And so what you're looking at here is a dendrogram of insect control traits. Okay, so if you think about the biology across the planet, for several decades now, people have been searching this biology to find traits that confer tolerance to insects. Okay, we've been working in this area for quite some time, and we feel we've been pretty successful. So if you look at this dendrogram, along the outside there, you'll see a name. For example, Cry21BA1 or Cry1I or Cry40BA. Each one of these is a different insect control trait, and the insects that they control is demonstrated by or indicated by the color of the stem leading to that particular trait. So for example, if it has a red stem, that means it controls lepidopterans, which are the moths or butterfly species. If it's got a green stem, it controls coleopterans, which are beetle species. If it's blue or sort of purple, I guess, on the diagram, it means it controls nematodes, which are worms. And then finally, the ones that are sort of more yellowish or brownish are the dipterans or the fly species. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is a dendrogram that shows you many, many examples of traits that control each of those classes of pests. But the important thing to note is that all the ones that are colored in purple are ones that are discovered by Bayer CropScience. The ones that are not in purple, the ones that are just in black, are the traits that have been discovered by everyone else in the industry combined. So what I hope this helps to reinforce is that Bayer CropScience has been very rigorous in its approach to discovering insect control genes. We've been doing it for quite some time, and we have a really robust library of insect traits. The reason why this brings value is because, as Dirk described in his earlier slide, there's a number of insect pests that you'd like to try control with traits. And so by having a bigger library of traits to draw from, you can then pinpoint and choose the very best traits to be combined against a key insect pest and hopefully come up with the most robust opportunities in the marketplace. What you're seeing more and more in the industry, obviously, is the concept of stacking. And what stacking means is that you're not just putting a single trait into a crop to try to give the farmer what he's looking for in his products. You're actually trying to bring in a whole suite of genes in at one time that allows the farmer to have resistance or tolerance to a number of different stresses or pests in the marketplace. So if you look at the concepts we're working for in soybean right now, the upper bullet mentions multiple herbicide tolerance. What this means is that we're not just putting one herbicide tolerance trait into our crops. We're actually working with 2 and in some cases 3 different herbicide tolerances. What this allows the farmer to do is to have flexibility each year in terms of which herbicide they would choose to use in the field. Liberty Link is the trait that provides tolerance to the herbicide Liberty. Glytol provides tolerance to the herbicide glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. And finally, the HPPD traits are specific herbicides that inhibit photosynthesis in plants. So again, it's flexibility to the farmer. Talking about multiple insect tolerance, I described on a previous slide how we've developed a large suite of traits that we can bring in to control different insects. So for example, in soybean, there's some lepidopteran species that are problematic on soy, as well as some hemipterans. Hemipterans are the sucking insects like aphids and ligas. So we have traits that can control these insects as well. And then finally, nematode control. In soybean in particular, there are nematodes that can feed on the roots of the plants and can do heavy damage to the plants. And one key nematode pest is referred to as soybean cyst nematode. So if you move ahead, please, to the next slide, entitled Soybean Cyst Nematode Control. This is a photograph of a couple of different plants that were grown in the laboratory in the presence of soybean cyst nematode. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but if you look at the photograph on the left, which is labeled control, if you look at the roots, you'll see a number of red growths on the side of the plant. What each one of those little red spots represents is a cyst. Okay. A cyst is it's basically a case of nematode eggs, and the eggs themselves are very small. But what happens is that each one of these eggs can hatch, and other 300 nematodes can come out. Okay, it looks like I've regained control of the screen. Thanks very much. So each one of these cysts contains several hundred eggs, and this is in the first cycle of the nematodes, so we're 10 days into the life of a plant. After 30 days, each one of these cysts will hatch, and 300 more nematodes will come out, and they'll reinfect the same plant. So as you can imagine, over the life cycle of over the growing season of the plant, you just get this incredible infestation of nematodes onto the root, and each time they feed on the root, they further damage the root and make it difficult for the plant to take up water and take up nutrients. So the effects can be pretty severe. If you look at the plant on the right, this has a particular trait that we put in for nematode resistance, and you can tell that the plants are quite clean. There's a couple places here where you can see just a few cysts on the plant, but nonetheless the differences between the non-GM plant, or the non-GM check, and our soybean plants containing the trait are substantial. We've done a lot of work where we've put these into field tests, and we go through and we'll count the number of cysts on plants containing the trait, which is shown here on the right in purple, or lacking the trait, which is shown here on the left in blue. As you can plainly see, there's a substantial drop in the number of nematodes that are able to feed on a plant when you provide a particular trait into the plant. This is great for farmers because it allows them to have higher yields in soybean each year. To give you some similar examples for a different crop, which is very near and dear to my heart, this is corn. This is where I spend the bulk of my time. Nonetheless, the trait concepts are similar. We want to bring in a number of traits. We want to provide them as stacked so we can allow the farmer to sort of pick and choose which traits they want and have greater flexibility in terms of what they grow each year. So we provide stacks in the areas of herbicide tolerance, and then we also provide stacks in the area of insect control. Speaking to the area of herbicide tolerance, these are fairly easy to set up and test for. All you do is you introduce your genes into the crop, and then you spray the crop with herbicide and see if the crop is able to survive well. So if you look at the image on the right, for example, these are all plants that were sprayed with the herbicide Roundup. So a plant without the gene is shown here in the front in the smaller cup. As you can tell, it did not do very well. It became brown and died out very quickly. Whereas all the plants in the bigger pots behind it were sprayed right alongside the control, but contain a gene that provides tolerance to the herbicide, in this case Roundup. So we can move from the greenhouse quickly into the field. We can do this over multiple growing seasons and show that we have very strong performance from our herbicide tolerance traits. Similarly, we can follow a similar process with insect control traits. We can start out in the lab. We can prepare artificial diets, which are shown here, where we can actually grow the larvae of various insects. The larvae you're looking at here are for corn earworm, which is a pretty important pest on corn. As you can see here, we've got some nice, healthy-looking adults growing in the two wells on the left. If you compare that to the two wells on the right, what we've done here is we've fed them small amounts of different traits. And what we observe is instead of reaching the adult phase, the insects terminate very early on. They display what's referred to as a stunt in that they don't grow big, and we observe mortality soon thereafter. So again, comparing the controls to the transgenic, or excuse me, to the traits perform very well. When we see a result like this, for example, with corn earworm, we then introduce the gene into plant, and we put the insects on the plants and see how the plants do. So shown here is a plant that has been infested with corn earworm that does not contain a trait versus a plant infested with corn earworm that does contain a trait. Again, the trait provides very nice protection against corn earworm in this particular example. To give you one more example of performance in a plant, one key insect in corn is western corn rootworm. So this is an insect that feeds on the roots of plants and can cause pretty severe damage over the course of the growing season. So the plant on the left is non-GM, does not contain one of our traits. The plant on the right is GM and does contain one of our traits. So you can tell the plant on the left, severe root damage from the western corn rootworm. So the entire upper node of roots is gone, the entire second node of roots is gone, and you have to get down into the third node, and even in the third node you can observe some root damage down there. In contrast, plants containing our trait, pristine, they perform very, very well, showing that we observe complete tolerance to western corn rootworm in this particular example. So to kind of sum it all up and bring it all together, Bayer CropScience is really growing in the area of R&D for seeds and traits. If you look at our investment over the past 5 years, we've expanded significantly. We've almost doubled our research spend, and a lot of the money for research right now is going into soybeans and going into corn. We're also expanding and building a relatively nice wheat business as well. So what this graph demonstrates is that for each of these core crops shown on the left, the different trait areas where we have a research program going to identify traits in that particular crop. So for example, in soy, we're doing research in the area of herbicide tolerance, in the area of insect control, and in the area of yield enhancement. All told, at this point, we've got about 60 different research programs going in Bayer CropScience to deliver the best possible traits into the marketplace to forward on to growers. With that, I will thank you for your attention and turn it over back to the moderator, and I mentioned that Dirk or myself would be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Well, thanks again, Brian. I think that was a great overview from both you guys on what your companies are up to. And I think the audience will see there are some similarities in their research programs. There's a lot of divergence as well. I mean, we saw some good examples of nematodes research, as well as then the Artesian line of looking at hybrid technology of looking for drought tolerance. So you guys also gave some really good examples of how you're conducting the research. Dirk, it was really good to show the examples of how you're doing the controlled experiments out in the field for drought, as well as Brian, thanks for showing the really detailed examples of doing the insect resistance trait analysis, because I think it really kind of highlights what you guys are doing behind the scenes. So are most of Syngenta's crops grown for food? What percent for medicines? So this is probably like a broad question.
Yeah, so we actually don't have much research in what we call medicinal plants. Our primary focus is on food production.
Okay. Now, what would you say that when you say food production, since Syngenta has a wide variety of different research programs in place, would that be more animal feed, or is that human food consumption for a lot of these traits that you guys are evaluating?
So we actually deal with food, feed, and fuel. So we are one of the leaders in the vegetable business, which is obviously human food. We are global in our footprint in corn and soybeans, which is feed. And then we also have inserted the amylase gene into corn plants, which is the first step in the enzymatic change of starch into ethanol for biofuels here in North America.
Okay. I do like the part of the question asking about medicine too. We've been considering a topic for a future webinar on the BioForum to talk about using plants to produce medicines, and there's a wide variety of technology innovation being developed in the state on that. If that actually is a further topic of interest, please put that in the survey that you'll receive from Greg. The more times I see that, then we'll definitely highlight that in the near future. So the next question here is, when anybody driving through rural North Carolina, you notice many cornfields that were moisture stressed. How did the climate in North Carolina impact corn growth in the state? I don't know if you guys have real knowledge of this. We need an agronomist.
I could take an early shot at this. I agree that early on in the season we weren't quite so wet, and I have some cornfields maybe 5 miles from my house, and they did look a little bit dry. As the summer went on, I thought they kind of picked up and came back, as we did pretty well in terms of rainfall in the middle of the year. So, hearing or understanding what's going on in the Midwest, where yields are quite poor, and comparing that to the yields that we're getting out here, which actually are probably a little bit better than average. I think most of the farmers in this area who are growing corn are actually probably getting a pretty good price for the crop because of the issues in the Midwest, and their yields were actually not so bad. So I'm hoping that most of those North Carolina farmers are actually fairly happy with how corn turned out this year.
Yeah, I've been hearing anecdotal myself that the corn farmers in the state are perhaps going to do rather well. Actually, I have a question I was going to ask Dirk, and it's kind of related to that, so let me stick with question number 2. Related to the Artesian, the Agrisure Artesian corn that you've Syngenta's developed, has any of that been planted in North Carolina, and have you seen how that's performed compared to other corn that's been grown in the state?
So I'm on the R&D side, and I could not tell you if Artesian was planted in North Carolina or not at this point. Okay. But we do have a number of locations in the Midwest this summer where farmers have planted Artesian and have made very favorable comments about its performance. So Artesian not only protects the plant at flowering time, but we've seen significant evidence that the genes involved help with season-long as well as grain-filling drought stress.
Excellent. All right, so moving on to question 3. Here's looking at what companies in RTP can do to help academia in the region. So actually, I can take a quick stab at this, and I'll let you guys, if you have any further knowledge. The Biotechnology Center tries to act as a facilitator to provide education. This is all at the K-12, community college level, as well as the university level. And we engage our corporate companies within the state quite a bit, either to provide the educational content or provide laboratory or resources to help with the training sessions, or to provide sponsorship support to make sure that these programs can be carried out. And I'd have to say that for the major ag biotech companies in the state, I've actually done quite a bit doing this to assist us in those efforts. But do you guys have any specific examples that either Syngenta or Bayer CropScience have been involved in?
I can describe a couple of things at Bayer. One thing that we've done has been to take in students who are just interested in ag biotech and trying to learn more about it. So we'll take them on either during the summertime as a sort of an internship opportunity, or even during the school year where they might have a day or two during the week when they're not taking classes, and they can come out here and literally work a full day. You know, some students actually do both, where they kind of come on during the summer and then they stay on and continue working. And it's just to provide them greater experience in. The other thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to build up greater relationships between specific departments in local universities. In this regard, we've been talking to people in the development office at NC State to find out if there are ways where we can work with professors who are interested in obtaining more training for their students. View biotech is one possible job opportunity in the future, and allow them to kind of come over and gain some exposure in an area which they may not be so easily exposed to. And we find that there's a lot of folks who are interested in taking up these kinds of opportunities.
So from Syngenta's perspective, we've got a number of collaborations with the various universities. The other thing that we also do, though, we have a site which is called SyngentaThoughtSeeders.com, where we are soliciting input from people outside of Syngenta to help solve problems.
That's a great example, I think. We've taken a look at that quite a bit ourselves to kind of brainstorm ideas. The next question here, and actually there's a few questions related to this, is job opportunities. What are the growth for job opportunities? And question number 9 is internships in the area. But what are your two perspectives on? I mean, both of you guys mentioned your companies are growing your operations across the globe. But are there job opportunities here in North Carolina, and any thoughts on that?
So this is Syngenta, have currently more than 20 open positions. And for here at RTP, you can go to jobs.syngenta.com and explore those opportunities. And over the next 18 months or more, I know that there will be more open positions being made available.
All right.
Yeah, and speaking to Bayer CropScience also, I think we're like Syngenta in that we're in a phase of growth right now, which is potentially good for hiring. Just speaking to just the research effort in our site, I know that over the next I think 18 months, we're projected to add between 20 and 25 positions, and that's just in research. We also have development activities taking place at our site, and they're on sort of a separate hiring scheme altogether, but I know that they're also poised for growth. All of our positions were required to post on the Bayer CropScience website. It's fairly easy to navigate to, and you can search by region, so you can search for just the jobs within RTP. And so, compared to other employers, I think there's a lot of growth in biotech, and I think that bodes well for people who are receiving training in this area.
Yeah, one more comment from Syngenta side. We have more than one major site in North Carolina, so we have a significant site in Greensboro, and there are also 25 open positions in our Greensboro facility.
Okay. So it sounds like there's definitely tons of opportunities. Well, we kind of discussed education for, students and people wanting to get jobs within the ag biotech industry. But if people are in the agricultural sector already, if they're actually farmers, question 5 is, what do your companies do to kind of assist them? And really, that's the heart of this whole webinar, is to provide an opportunity for people to learn what your companies are up to, so they can determine whether or not you guys are providing them a possible valuable seed for their future growth. So how do you guys interact directly with the farmer?
I can give an example of some of the work we did when we launched Agrisure Artesian. This example actually is not from North Carolina, it's from Nebraska, but would have application here in North Carolina because of the irrigated corn that's grown here. We worked with 27 different farmers who each controlled a center pivot. And in those center pivots, we told them what we would like to do. So the herbicide program, the trait package, the hybrid, the disease protection, seed care package, and asked the farmer if we did that on half of their pivot, and they could do whatever they wanted on the other half of their pivot. And then, in a sense, if that was on the east and west side of the pivot, on the north side of the pivot, we watered with 75% water, and on the south side, 100% water. And in those 27 pivots, the Syngenta solution with 75% water out-yielded the farmer's solution with 100% water. And that's one of the ways we go about not only demonstrating our technology, but also teaching our customers how to exploit that technology for their maximum benefit.
All right, Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just in a general sense, I know that Bayer as well as Syngenta probably have similar positions. I mean, we have our sales forces that are out there, educating farmers as to, how our crops should be grown and the benefits that they bring to farmers. Beyond that, we also have this group of folks called technical service representatives, and basically they're just the gurus or the experts on everything that's packed into a given seed. And so what they do is they're the direct, they go around, they talk to all the farmers directly and make sure that they understand exactly how you should be growing, what types of product is best in your geography, so they can really, farming has become very precise over time. So, all of the big agribusinesses have become incredibly intelligent in terms of, how to deliver best practices to the farmer so that they can maximize their yield. And it's a really pretty tight interaction when you talk to many farmers in the Midwest.
Okay. Well, I want to jump ahead real quick to question 10, because I think it relates to what we were just talking about. So, this question was, what do you guys do, what does Bayer and Syngenta do to interact with the farmers? Well, another engagement level is at the seed seller, seed distributor. So with some of the products you guys were talking about, either with the Agrisure, Artesian, or Viptera products, or with the Bayer products, looking at the different insect tolerance or herbicide tolerance and all that, are all those types of seed available for purchase by all farmers, or are those usually restricted to certain regional areas?
So in the case of Syngenta, we operate through a series of dealer networks here in North Carolina, and all of our products are available through them. The issue I think you have to understand, though, is that as a seed product, the various hybrids or varieties are adapted to specific growing zones. So a product that's applicable for a farmer in Illinois may not be the best product for a farmer in North Carolina. But we do provide products that are fit for the North Carolina market, just like we provide products that are fit for the Illinois market. So yes, the products I talked about are available through your local seed dealers, and we also sell our chemistry through a similar set of dealers.
Yeah,
related
similar
to that, Dirk. Okay, is it the seed distribution networks? Are they usually the experts then provide the guidance then to the farmer, or is it best for them to talk either with folks from Cooperative Extension or Department of Agricultural agencies to really kind of learn what's kind of the best products for the area?
So I think the local seed dealer really has a pulse on what the best varieties are or hybrids at that point in time. But
okay.
Technology on producing the crops, I certainly advocate that farmers utilize all the resources available to them. So Agricultural Extension, the state universities, all have significant input in how to grow a better crop here in the state of North Carolina. So I really think a farmer needs to have contact with all of those avenues to get information.
Okay. Well, I realize the time we're running a little long. I see that we still have quite a handful of participants still on board, though. Greg, do you mind if we take a little more time?
That's fine. We have about 3-4 more questions we can go ahead and get answered.
Okay.
That'd be fine.
Excellent. Yeah, these are good questions here. So I know some of the traits that were talked about today, some were inherent traits within the species, such as the Artesian hybrid traits, and some of the other traits were genetically modified traits, looking at the Viptera, the cryproteins, or other types of traits. So how does Syngenta or Bayer CropScience, related here, number question 6, how does it interface then with the folks who are more in the organic crops market when you're looking at pesticide treatment or what have you? Do you guys have any examples of how you guys have interfaced with the non-GM sectors?
Yeah, I can make a few comments around that. So, you know, both the organizations today presented information around marker-assisted breeding, and that's really manipulating the genes using our biotechnology tools that are inherent in a crop plant to provide desired traits faster, better, or in some senses because they're genetically quite complex. Without marker-assisted breeding, you wouldn't be able to deliver those. We also, Syngenta, I'm not sure if Bayer does, but we have a biologics business for pest control, particularly around insect control. So those things are certainly you know, available to people who do not want to plant varieties or hybrids with GM traits in them. But I think another thing that I think that people really need to understand is over the next 30 to 40 years, we're going to have to feed about another 2 billion people on this planet. And if you look at the major grain crops, and you look at, there's a couple of studies that were out last spring around both corn and soybeans, and if you produce corn in the Midwest under what you would consider to be state-of-the-art organic methods, and same thing with soybeans, but with corn, you would be producing a grain crop where yields per acre would be about what were available in the late 60s, and with soybeans, it'd be like the early 70s. And the gap in production when you're faced with 2 billion more people in the next 30 to 40 years, I think is something organics will have a very difficult time to contend with.
Yeah, at Bayer, we sort of approach this from a sustainability standpoint, which is kind of similar to how Dirk was just describing it. We understand organic crops is sort of a niche market, and there are people who are always going to support it. But in terms of long-term sustainable agriculture to feed everyone on the planet, it just can't be employed in a large scale and achieve the goals of just basic food production that are needed at the present time, and certainly not in the future. So, we've chosen to go down a certain road, and we think that the planet needs it, and, we'll do it in as safe and as sustainable a way as possible. Certainly the safety packages that go into safety behind pesticides, herbicides, genetically modified crops, they're more stringent now than they ever have been. So we think, the industry by and large is a very clean industry, and we're doing what's really needed to keep the planet going.
Okay. The next question, guys, on a little bit different topic, and I think each of you touched upon it either in the Q&A or during your presentations, but what are your efforts in developing advanced feedstocks for the biofuels industry? And this is definitely even related to not only perhaps first-generation biofuels using starch, but hopefully even the future technologies using cellulose or other types of technologies.
So Syngenta just released a little over a year ago Artesian, which is a feedstock for it's corn for dry mill ethanol plants in the Midwest. Artesian allows the operator of the plant to get a 10% increase in ethanol yield while decreasing the amount of water and the amount of natural gas to heat the mash. So provides not only increased output but lower inputs. We are also doing significant work in other parts of the world around sugarcane and improving productivity of sugarcane, actually fundamentally changing the planting system as well as the productivity of that crop. We have a fair amount of knowledge around the enzymes that are involved in the pathways to produce ethanol, and are looking at how we could enhance other crop species to be used as feedstocks, but nothing that we're say is close to market at this point.
Yeah, and speaking to Bayer CropScience, we've on the feedstock, I mean, obviously we're quite interested in corn. That's more of a North American market. In terms of other parts of the world, we've also had a research program going now for some time in sugarcane, where we've developed sugarcane varieties with a higher sugar content in them, with the thought being that sugarcane can be used and is used quite extensively now as a biofuel crop. So we just want to allow this to be done with higher yield and greater production of fuel from sugarcane.
Okay. And let's close with this final question. I think, Brian, this is directed to you since you mentioned rice in your presentation. Are you aware if rice is at all grown in North Carolina or the Southeast?
I am not actually. Much of our research in rice is, I mean, we do a little bit on the West Coast, but our major research stations in rice are actually in Asia. So if you think about what we're doing in India and in Singapore, that's where we do the bulk of our research, and that's where we'd be more likely to have the outdoor rice paddies. So I'm not aware of anything in North Carolina.
Paul,
okay.
I might be able to add a little bit to that. I believe in the northeastern part of the state, there is one company that is growing some genetically modified rice for a medicinal product that they're making, actually a nutritional supplement that is being produced. But as far as I know, that's the only rice paddies that I know of in North Carolina.
Rice is not a major crop in the state. I'm sure it could be grown here, but there may actually be higher value crops. I'm not sure if our climate conditions are optimal for rice, but it certainly could be grown here. Well, I want to really thank our audience. These have been really good questions, and again, I want to thank our two presenters today. Not only do they do a good job, I think, of providing some good informational content to everyone, but provide some really valuable insight from the Q&A session. And Greg, we really thank you again for hosting this and allowing us to offer this content.
I want to thank you, Paul, and the North Carolina Biotechnology Center for co-sponsoring today's BioForum, but I would especially like to thank our other panelists, Dirk Benson from Syngenta and Brian Vande from Bayer CropScience. You had a wonderful presentation today, and I believe everyone will agree we learned an awful lot today about Ag Biotech and your